Today we are going to read Canto 7. The title of this canto is The Discovery of the Cosmic Spirit and the Cosmic Consciousness. And it's very interesting that for many years this canto had no title. And in the Birth Centenary Library that was published for Sri Aurobindo's 100th birthday in 1972, there the editors gave a title for this canto. But when they started preparing the new edition of Sri Aurobindo's collected works, the people who were examining, comparing the published text with Sri Aurobindo's papers, very unexpectedly they came across a loose sheet of paper. It had been overlooked, and it had this title. So we are very, very fortunate, blessed. People sometimes ask me, but it had another title before. And I say, yes, but this is Sri Aurobindo's title. This is the title that he gave. Book 7, the Book of Yoga. Canto 7. The Discovery of the Cosmic Spirit and the Cosmic Consciousness. In the little hermitage, in the forest's heart, in the sunlight and the moonlight and the dark, the daily human life went plodding on, even as before, with its small, unchanging works and its spare outward body of routine and happy quiet of ascetic peace. The old beauty smiled of the terrestrial scene. She too was her old gracious self to men. The ancient mother clutched her child to her breast, pressing her close in her environing arms, as if earth, ever the same, could forever keep the living spirit and body in her clasp, as if death were not there, nor end, nor change. Accustomed only to read outward signs, none saw aught new in her, none divined her state. They saw a person where was only God's vast, a still being or a mighty nothingness. To all she was the same perfect Savitri, a greatness and a sweetness and a light poured out from her upon her little world. Life showed to all the same familiar face. Her acts followed the old unaltered round. She spoke the words that she was wont to speak, and did the things that she had always done. Her eyes looked out on earth's unchanging face. Around her soul's muteness all moved as of old. A vacant consciousness watched from within, empty of all but bare reality. There was no will behind the word and act, no thought formed in her brain to guide the speech. An impersonal emptiness walked and spoke in her. Something perhaps unfelt, unseen, unknown, guarded the body for its future work, or nature moved in her old stream of force. Perhaps she bore, made conscious in her breast, the miraculous nihil, origin of our souls, and source and sum of the vast world's events, the womb and grave of thought, a cipher of God, a zero circle of being's totality. It used her speech and acted in her acts. It was beauty in her limbs, life in her breath. The original mystery wore her human face. So we'll go back to the beginning, and Dhanalakshmi will read.
In the little hermitage in the forest park, in the sunlight and the moonlight and the dark, the daily human life went plodding on, even as before, with its small, unchanging words and its spare outward body of routine and happy quiet of ascetic peace.
So Sri Aurobindo is reminding us of the story and where we are. He's bringing us back to earth. We are back in the hermitage, in the forest, where Savitri lives with Shraddhavan and his parents. And there, despite this great change that has happened in her, everything just goes on as normal. The ordinary daily human life went plodding on. Plodding is you're just walking without much consciousness, moving along. Just as before. He says, even as before, just as before. With all its small, unchanging works, all the things that happened every day, and its spare outward body of routine. They are living a very, very simple life. And there are certain things that are done every day, and that just continues. There's no excitement, no special events, no luxury, spare. That means a very, very simple life that they lived. And it's happy quiet of ascetic peace. Ascetics are people who go away from all the usual interests and enjoyments and pleasures and worries of human life, and they go to commune with their deeper being, with nature, with the higher being. So for this is why they have gone into the forest. So there it's a happy quiet of ascetic peace. An ascetic is a person who renounces the world and goes to live very simply in order to find and unite with the divine.
The word beauty smiled of the terrestrial scene. She too was a old,
Gracious.
gracious self-woman.
Yes. So the order of the words is unusual. We can do this in poetry. The old beauty of the terrestrial scene, of the earthly landscape. It's still smiling. It's all that beauty of the forest there. No? And she too, Savitri too, she seemed to be just the same, her old, gracious self, to everybody that she met. We had a lovely description at the beginning of this book, in the first canto of Book 7, of how she served everybody. She completely forgot about being a princess, so she swept the house, she brought the water, she helped her mother-in-law, she looked after things, heaped the fire of altar and kitchen. Yes, that was her job. She's looking after the house there. And for one whole year, she didn't leave it. You know? She just stayed in that little hermitage area. She didn't go exploring in the forest with Shraddhavan. She did all this with so much grace and love and generosity. Bebe.
The ancient mother clutched her child to her breast, pressing her close in her environing arms, as if first ever the same could forever keep the living spirit and body in her clasp, as if death were not there, nor end, nor change.
So the ancient mother, our ancient mother Earth, she's holding on to Savitri, like a mother holds tight her child on her breast, pressing her close in her environing arms. All this earthly scene, these are the arms of our mother, the earth, holding her close. As if unchanging earth ever the same, could forever keep the living spirit and body in her clasp. As if nothing need ever change, as if there's nothing like death. As if there's no end, as if it will go on always like this. Nothing should change. The earth is holding her precious child. Chandra. Accustomed
only to read outward
signs,
none saw out new in her non-divine had state. They saw that person where was only God's was, has still been almighty nothingness.
Yes, thank you. So accustomed. We are accustomed to meet here on Thursday afternoons to study Savitri. We are used to doing that. So the people who live around Savitri are used only to look at the outward signs. They don't see what is her inner state, no? So since they only see the outward signs, they don't see anything new. We had this word ought last time, I think. It means anything. They didn't see anything new in her. And nobody divined. Here this word means to guess or to sense. There are people called water diviners. We have them in the villages here, no? Who they walk across the field and they can feel where the water is. That person is called a water diviner. He can sense the presence of the water, but he's not using any of our usual senses. He's not using his sight or his hearing or his sense of touch or smell or taste. To divine something, it means to perceive something in some other way, without our senses. And it's connected, the spelling of the word is connected with the French word deviner, which means to guess. But usually this divining is not guessing, it is knowing. It's knowing in another way. So nobody feels, nobody senses that Savitri is in a different state. They see Savitri, a person. But in fact, that person, Savitri, isn't there. There's only the vastness of God. A still being. That's not a person, that's not limited, that's not responding to the stimulus of the environment. No? A still being or a mighty nothingness. So there's this form there, and the form goes on behaving just as usual. But in her consciousness, there's nothing there. Patricia.
To all, she was the same perfect Savitri, a greatness and a sweetness and a light poured out from her upon her little world.
Yes. So that same perfect Savitri, they don't see any change. And just as before, she was always pouring a greatness and a sweetness and a light. She continues to do that. Venkat.
Light shone to all the same familiar face. Her acts followed the old unaltered ground. She spoke the words that she was wont to speak and did the things that she had always done.
Yes. So there she is, a living body. It shows the same familiar face. Nothing has changed in her appearance. All the things that she did before, she continues to do in the same way. She speaks, but she speaks those same gentle, loving words that she always was speaking. And she did the things that she had always done. No change. So this corresponds to something that we know about Sri Aurobindo, that when he was in this state, he was in the middle, actually he was at the very height of his political activity. He was traveling around the country, giving talks all over the place. He was in charge of 2 English newspapers and 1 Bengali one. When this state first came on him in Baroda, he knew that he had to go to, I think it was Pune, to give a talk there. And he asked Lele, the guru, the yogi who had helped him, he said, "What shall I do?" And Lele said, "Don't worry. You go and stand in front of the people and you salute them, and then you will speak. Whatever you have to say, you will speak." And that's what he did for about 6 months. It went on like that. And he was doing everything that was needed for editing these journals and so on. But within himself, his state was like the one that Ganga Lakshmi will read for us now, the next sentence.
Her eyes look out on earth's unchanging face. Around her soul's witness, all move as of old. The vacant consciousness watch from within, empty of all the bare reality.
So the eyes in the body are functioning. She looks out on this unchanging face. Everything in the forest looks just the same as usual. Everything is moving around her just the same as usual. But her soul is completely silent. No? Her soul is drowned in that everlasting peace. No? So there is a consciousness watching, looking out, seeing, experiencing, but it is empty. It's a vacant consciousness that's watching from within, which doesn't respond, which doesn't feel any reality in those things. It's empty of everything except this sense of bare reality, of existence, pure, vast, silent, unknowable. Basuji, would you read?
There was no will behind the word and act, no thought formed in her brain to guide the speech. An impersonal emptiness walked and spoke in her, something perhaps unfelt, unseen, unknown, guarded the body for its future work, for nature moved in her old stream of force.
Thank you. So this is her state. All these things that she's doing, the words that she's speaking, there's no will deciding what to say or to do. There's no thought forming in the brain to guide the speech. She's moving around, she's speaking, but she's just an impersonal emptiness. So perhaps something unfelt, unseen, unknown is keeping the body alive, looking after it, making it do what it has to do. It's guarding it for its future work. In future it will have to do something. So it is just being maintained like this. No? Or perhaps, and this is something which the old traditions speak of, that when one reaches this state of emptiness, nature, the force of nature, just goes on doing what it has always done. It's like machinery. Nature still moved in its old stream of force, just in the habitual way. And what is this consciousness that she's carrying within her? Helen.
Perhaps she both made conscious in her breast the miraculous needing origin of our soul, and source and sun of the vast world's event, the warmth and grave of soul, a cycle of God, a zero circle of beings to come.
Yes. So he says perhaps, it's not clear or sure, no? But she seems to be carrying in her breast where her consciousness is. There is some consciousness there. Perhaps she's carrying this miraculous nihil. Nihil means nothing or nothingness. And he says that miraculous nihil, that particular nothingness, that unknowableness, is the origin of our souls. That's where our souls have come from. And not only our souls, but also everything that happens in this world. That nothingness is what everything comes out of, and that's what everything goes back to. It's the source and a sum. It's the that when we add up everything that happens in the world, that nothingness is the result of it. It's the womb from which everything, from which thought is born, and it's at the same time it will be the grave of thought. All thoughts will die and come back into that nothingness, that cipher of God. A cipher can mean any number, but it often means the zero sign. So that's a cipher of God, an empty sign, or a sign of emptiness. And then it says a zero circle of being's totality. So a zero is a nothing, and perhaps this is the limit, the circle, the boundary of all the manifestations of existence. And she seems to be carrying that, made conscious in her breast, that nothingness of everything. But that nothing is the source, the origin of everything. Mrs. Basso, would you read?
It used her speech and acted in her acts. It was beauty in her dreams, life in her dreams. The original mystery word her human face.
Yes. So that nothingness is in her. It uses her capacity of speech to say what has to be said. It does what has to be done. No? And it keeps her beautiful. It manifests as beauty in her limbs. It manifests as life in her breathing in and out. That is the sign of life for us. No? Are they breathing? Yeah. So that original mystery, that mysterious, unknowable something, which is the beginning and end of everything, it is wearing Savitri's human face. Martin.
Thus was she lost within to separate self. The mortal ego perished in God's night.
Yes. So this is the way in which the ego can be completely dissolved. This is the spiritual realization. With the psychic realization, the ego becomes under the control of the soul, becomes purified, it becomes in contact with the soul of everything. But there's still an ego. But in this realization, there's this complete dissolution of all limitations. Her mortal ego perished in God's night, in a kind of darkness. Tatiana, would you continue?
Only a body was left, the eagle's shell, afloat in the spirit and form of the world sea, sea being watched by motionless eyes, and clear body light.
Yes. So everything that was Savitri has gone, only the body is left. That's the shell, the outer covering of the ego. And the ego's gone, just the shell is left. And that shell is floating, adrift. It's not guiding itself, it's just being carried along, drifting. We are carried along by the current in the sea or the river. It's a floating, the drift and foam, the bubbles of the world sea, all the appearances. The body is just being carried. And this world sea just seems to be a dream, a sea of dream. And she is watching it motionless, without moving. Whatever is watching, whoever is watching, is in a figure, a shape, or an image of unreal reality. I can't say anything about it, we just have to accept the suggestion.
But these words are contradictory, unreal reality.
Yes. In many places in the poem, Sri Aurobindo gives us these contradictions, and it's to open up something that is beyond the contradictions. Joel.
An impersonal foresight could already see in the unthinking knowledge of the Spirit. Even now it seemed nigh on, inevitable. The individual died, the cosmos passed. These gone, the transcendental grew amid. The Holy Ghost without the Father and Son, or a substratum of what once had been, being that never will to bear a world, restored to its original loneliness, impassive, soul, silent, intangible.
Yes, thank you. An impersonal foresight. Foresight is when you see what will probably happen. You see in advance that this is what is likely to happen or can possibly happen. So Savitri experiences a kind of foresight. She can see in advance, but in a very impersonal way, from that emptiness, that impersonal emptiness. She can see that the individual will cease to exist, and the universe will cease to exist. The individual die, the cosmos pass. So this is what her foresight predicts, no? And in the unthinking knowledge of the Spirit, the direct knowledge of the Spirit, even now, already, it seems to be almost done, nigh done. Nigh means nearly. That dissolution seems to have been, it's nearly done. It's inevitable. The individual is going to die. The cosmos is going to dissolve. The universe is going to dissolve. And if these things dissolve, if the individual dies or dissolves, if the universal dissolves, then the transcendental, the third state of the Supreme, also becomes something completely unreal. The transcendental becomes a myth. The transcendental, Sri Aurobindo equates with the Holy Ghost. The Father is the universal Father. The Son is the individual, in that transcendental state. So what are these? These are symbolic terms. If there's no universe, if there's no individual, what is this mythical, unreal reality of the transcendent? Or perhaps when these things dissolve, there's a substratum left, something underneath that was supporting it. A strata, it's a level in geology. A substratum, it's what's the soil or the foundation that's underneath. So that universe, that individual had been there. Perhaps just the substratum is left. It's just a state of pure existence, being that never willed to bear a world. It never intended to create, manifest and support a universe. And now that has got dissolved, so that state of pure being is restored to its original loneliness. It can go back to that solitary state of pure existence. Impassive, feeling nothing, soul, alone, silent, intangible. It can't be perceived or touched in any way. She feels as if it's almost come to this, that the world has ceased to exist, she has ceased to exist, that reality, whatever it is, so we will stop there for today. In the little hermitage, in the forest's heart, in the sunlight and the moonlight and the dark, the daily human life went plodding on, even as before, with its small unchanging works and its spare outward body of routine and happy quiet of ascetic peace. The old beauty smiled of the terrestrial scene. She too was her old gracious self to men. The ancient mother clutched her child to her breast, pressing her close in her environing arms, as if earth ever the same could forever keep the living spirit and body in her clasp, as if death were not there, nor end, nor change. Accustomed only to read outward signs, none saw aught new in her, none divined her state. They saw a person where was only God's vast, a still being or a mighty nothingness. To all she was the same perfect Savitri, a greatness and a sweetness and a light poured out from her upon her little world. Life showed to all the same familiar face. Her acts followed the old unaltered round. She spoke the words that she was wont to speak, and did the things that she had always done. Her eyes looked out on earth's unchanging face. Around her soul's muteness all moved as of old. A vacant consciousness watched from within, empty of all but bare reality. There was no will behind the word and act, no thought formed in her brain to guide the speech. An impersonal emptiness walked and spoke in her. Something, perhaps, unfelt, unseen, unknown, guarded the body for its future work. All nature moved in her old stream of force. Perhaps she bore, made conscious in her breast, the miraculous nihil, origin of our souls, and source and sum of the vast world's events, the womb and grave of thought, a cipher of God, a zero circle of being's totality. It used her speech and acted in her acts. It was beauty in her limbs, life in her breath. The original mystery wore her human face. Thus was she lost within to separate self. Her mortal ego perished in God's night. Only a body was left, the ego's shell, afloat mid drift and foam of the world's sea, a sea of dream watched by a motionless sense in a figure of unreal reality. An impersonal foresight could already see. In the unthinking knowledge of the Spirit, even now it seemed nigh done, inevitable. The individual die, the cosmos pass. These gone, the transcendental grew a myth, the Holy Ghost without the Father and Son, or a substratum of what once had been, being that never willed to bear a world, restored to its original loneliness, impassive, soul, silent, intangible.